All right.
Okay, here we go. So this team, Energy Shift team, is a much bigger team than the people whose names you've seen here. And some of those people are on this Zoom call itself. But this is a project that was funded by the Sasaki Foundation. We're just on the tail end. We're wrapping up about a 9-month project. So we're kind of, this is near the end of our project. And so we're going to share just a little snippet of the kinds of activities we've been engaged in the city of Boston. Next slide, please. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes to frame this whole thing, and then Olivia is going to take over a bit of a kind of a narrative chronological order. Her input was boots on the ground, boots in basements, really checking out electrical systems. She'll talk about that. Keeley will talk about new lessons learned as we've done this project, and then we'll finish with just some wrap-up points and turn it over into discussion Q&A. Next slide. All right, I'm going to jar you here with something that has emerged and I just became aware of in the last couple of days. And I really have to speak to this as an academic, as a STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math professional, and in light of the turmoil that's occurring in this country. So today is a national strike by STEM professionals and academics. And it's not lost on me that also Olivia and Keeley are students at Boston University, and that we felt called to speak to this moment. And this strike meant really, you know, it's not about business as usual. It's not about the status quo today. And it's not about just being performative, it's about substance. And so what I felt and what we felt is that we really couldn't deliver the content today as if it was just a normal day. And so you're going to hear a transformed set of remarks from me, transformed to center racial justice. And that may mean that some important details about our work are going to be missing, but that just means we're going to have another opportunity to re-engage, and we can share more about this project later. So I just wanted to put that out there. You can find out more about the national strike today at shutdownstem.com. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do instead is just focus on this one slide, literally one snapshot since we started our project funded by the Sasaki Foundation back in September until now. Because this photo tells a story. It tells a story of serendipity and a thread that we can trace all the way back to the Merrimack Valley on September 13th, 2018. Even though this picture is taken in the Bethel AME Church on Walk Hill Road in Jamaica Plain. And the issue of racial justice goes all the way back to the explosions and fires that happened on that fall day in 2018 and the aftermath of that gas disaster in which over 8,300 households, addresses were instantly without gas, fires, explosions, one young man died. And we saw in the aftermath of that tragedy how inequalities played out in terms of who could get the services and the help and the relief they needed and who were left out. And there was a racial justice dimension to that. The poor, mostly brown and Black communities in Lawrence definitely had adverse outcomes relative to more affluent, mostly white communities in Andover, to some degree North Andover. And so it started there. And what we wanted to do is apply lessons learned from that disaster. We found out that the National Guard and Columbia Gas quickly mobilized to deliver cooktops, electric cooktops, and electric space heaters to households. But they realized very quickly that they didn't know who could take these temporary electric solutions and who couldn't. And so we quickly saw, because as people who have been working on this for some years, Mothers Out Front, HEET, the Gas Leak Allies, we knew that there were solutions. Induction cooktops, portable induction cooktops could provide fast, safe, efficient cooking. But we didn't know whether some of these old houses had the electric capacity to actually be able to plug these things in. And so we saw the lessons from that. We knew that cities and towns could be actually proactive about finding out before a disaster strikes, before there's a gas outage, what the capacity of households are to be able to take these temporary electric solutions, and that could set them up for the ultimate electrification that's needed to achieve our urgent climate goals for the longer term. So that's the kind of scope of the project. But one of the major things that has come out from this work, is just the unexpected serendipitous developments. And this picture really exemplifies that, because we never knew that we were going to end up engaged with the Bethel AME Church. And there's Reverend Mariama White Hammond there in the back, who was so gracious to have invited through parishioner Dr. Susan Racine there on the right-hand side, Mary Brady, and other friends, Ania Camargo there, to invite us to go into that church and to sit in the pews and to listen to a different kind of take on climate justice and ecological justice. Reverend Mariama, I call myself an ecologist by training. I call myself an environmental scientist. She delivered a sermon about ecology and ecological justice that made me think about those terms in totally new ways. So that's really enriched me. And, just bringing it full circle, that picture there is from, I think it was December of last year. Feels like a decade ago, given everything that's happened since then. And, to bring it full circle, 3 days ago on Sunday, back in the Bethel AME Church, Reverend Mariama White Hammond delivered another sermon, and that was in honor of the memory of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And she, in her style and in her way, she introduced new ways of thinking once again to me about very common words. And she talked about breathing. And as you all know, the tragedy that played out that was almost unbearable was that George Floyd again said, "I can't breathe." And you talked about that term breathing in so many different and new ways. She related it back to a biblical passage with the prophet Ezekiel and drew lessons from that. And I was thinking, you don't have to accept the Bible or this God or that to get the message that she was delivering about the importance of breathing in so many different ways. And it made me think that it ties back to our own work here and the work of HEET, the work of Mothers Out Front, the work of the Gas Leak Allies, because we know that safe energy, clean energy, and the electrification that we need to do has the benefit of our kids' health, their respiratory health, and their ability to breathe. We even know that it connects to the issue of vulnerability to COVID, as the Harvard Public Health School has recently done the study that shows those connections between air quality and COVID. So there's so many threads that connect this work. And I know I'm talking at a very high level and I'm not really getting into the details that you might be searching for in this presentation. But fortunately, we've got a really excellent couple of speakers next, and I've far exceeded my time. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Keeley, to Olivia, who's going to talk about, again, some nuts and bolts, boots on the ground implementation of this work.
Nathan, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you sharing these stories from Bethel AME and just really reminding us how interconnected all these movements to achieve social justice and environmentalism and environmental justice are so interconnected. So something that's really important to remember, especially now and going forward. But again, as I said earlier, I'm Olivia Ruzzi, and I am an intern working for HEET, and I'm also a rising senior at Boston University. And my experience with this project began last September when I was first hired by HEET. And I was lucky enough to be able to jump right in with this project with Nathan and with Mary and Ricky and our other team members. And so at that point, it had been basically exactly a year since the Merrimack Valley gas disaster occurred. And at this point, the Energy Shift team was ready to take the next step in the project, which was doing a lot of outreach efforts to get people and communities in District 6 to be interested in our project and to volunteer to sign up to have their homes surveyed. And so all this hard work really paid off, and working with institutions like Bethel AME and so many others, we were able to connect with a lot of people throughout District 6. So once these people had been signed up, it was then my job to begin reaching out to them and scheduling visits for volunteers from the Energy Shift team to go to their homes and take these photos of their panels. So I did this primarily through phone, and I would just call them up and I would ask them some survey questions that we'd prepared, such as what type of building their home was, like if it was a single family home or a multifamily building, how old their home is, how they heat their home, what kind of stove they have, things like that. Basically just questions related to their current energy consumption, and also things that would give us hints as to what their current existing electrical capacity might be in their homes. And then also on these calls when I would schedule the visits. But before we officially started going out on the visits, we had to have a training with an electrician so all the volunteers could really know what we were looking for when we went out to take these photos. So this is when I got to meet Peg Preble, who is our amazing electrician friend who has been so critical in this project and has helped us so much. But she ran a training with all of us in October last year. And Keeley, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we have some photos from that training here. Peg is there in the red flannel. She was showing us how to identify the main switch and just pointing out things for us to look for when we were taking these photos. As you can see, we had a fun time just squeezing a bunch of people into all these little basements. And so that training was really helpful and just gave us the foundational knowledge that we needed to really take the project to the next level. So then after we had the training and we scheduled the visits, it was time to go back out into the field and start taking the photos. So I personally visited about 10 households on my own, or not on my own, but like with another volunteer from the team. And this was just such a great experience. Everybody that we worked with was so welcoming and just really interested in the work that we were doing, and they wanted to help out in any ways that they could. And I was just really grateful for that opportunity to connect with so many members of the Boston community in this way. And it was also just super fun. It was really funny because a lot of the times this would be the first time I was meeting these people. And then before I knew it, we would be on like a little adventure together, trying to find their electric panel in their basement and trying not to trip on things and trying not to disrupt people in a house. So those were all kinds of fun little challenges, and really made the experience even better. And so then after all these photos were taken, I was able to come up with a kind of methodology, just a system to keep all the photos organized and keep our data organized. So that was what I was doing from September through December, just the scheduling of visits and going out on the visits and then keeping track of the data. And now I will hand it off to Keeley for a bit to talk about her experience.
So I said it at the beginning, but my name is Keeley Bombard. I'm a rising junior at Boston University. And so I got on board when Olivia went abroad to London for the spring semester. So we had met through the environmental student organization at BU. And so she had recommended me to Nathan to take her place when she went abroad. So I came on board in January. And initially, lucky for me, I got to inherit the really, really organized methodology that Olivia set up. And so I got to get right into it and input the survey data and the panel photos that other members of our team were taking and collecting from their home visits, and I would input that into the system that Olivia created. And I was helped by the magnificent Mary Brady, who was on our call, and I would not have been able to do any of it in the beginning without her. She was very helpful. And yeah, so that was how I initially got on board. We were continuing to do that, continuing to reach out and do home visits, get more data. And then we were thinking that we were going to get to keep doing that. But then in March, when everything with COVID-19 got pretty serious, things changed for our project. We had to be pretty resilient, which is ironic, speaking about electrical resiliency. And so we could no longer conduct home visits. So we shifted our focus and we started looking at the data that we had already collected and the panel photos that we had already collected to kind of see, okay, we've done all of this collection, now what do we actually have? So Mary and I went through a lot of reaching out to participants that we had already visited to either get a clearer picture of their electric panel or fill in gaps in their survey data. So when all was said and done, we had both survey data and electric panel photos for 108 households, and the initial goal was 100, so that was really exciting for us. And we began analyzing the panel photos with our expert electrician, Peg Preppel, and she helped us to learn that what it says on the panel can't necessarily be trusted. If there's 200 amps going into a household, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's enough amps specifically to the kitchen for someone to run an induction cooktop. So we'll get into later what we did with that information and how we sort of reframed the final steps of the project. But yeah, so that was what happened with COVID-19. And then I'm going to turn it over to Olivia to summarize the data that we got from that 108 households.
Yes, so when I returned to HEET in May, again, I was fortunate enough to be able to jump right back in with the Sasaki project. And so over the past few weeks, I've been just working with Keeley and Mary a little bit more to also just tie up some of the loose ends and collect any last missing pieces of the data. And then I was able to review it and just do like a really brief, simple summary of some of the things that we found. But as Keeley said, we surveyed a total of 108 households, and from these homes, we identified clear main switch amp services from 77% of those homes. So we were really happy about that. And another thing that was important to us from the beginning was we wanted to try to have as diverse of a group of households as we could, which is part of the reason why we chose District 6, just because it is a really diverse area of Boston in terms of like cultural diversity and diversity in income and things like that. So we were able to survey a variety of households, and one aspect was the building type. We were able to, by the end, our survey was comprised of equal parts single family buildings, duplexes, triple deckers, and multifamily homes that were larger. We also had a diverse range of buildings of different ages. So we had some surveyed that were they were built as early as 1850, and some buildings were built as recently as 2005. And then we had everywhere in between. So that was pretty cool to see the electrical capacities in such a great range in terms of age. In terms of location, we had homes from 10 different zip code areas within District 6. And we also were able to survey some homes where the residents were renters and some where the homes had owners that were the residents. But something that Keeley and I were discussing and that we've been aware of is that, especially with regard to location and renters, we would have ideally liked to see even more diversity in those two categories in terms of who we surveyed. And like, for example, in location, there was one zip code where we had a lot of homes from this one zip code, and all of those homes were single family buildings, and they were all had residents who were the owners of the buildings. So Keeley, I don't know if you want to just jump in there and
Yeah, Olivia and I were talking about how this is a moment in our presentation that we can tie it back to what Nathan was talking about in the beginning. So from the beginning, I obviously wasn't here. This is when Olivia was here, but the team made an effort to pick a district that could have a diverse sample. But at the same time, you do have to take into account that it's more difficult to get into some of the houses. In lower income areas, there are people who are undocumented that might not be as comfortable with strangers coming into their homes. There are any number of factors that could have skewed our data towards higher income people who are more comfortable with strangers coming into their homes and digging around in their basements, like Olivia was saying. So 46% of our households did come from one particular zip code, but we did have a distribution of 10. So it would have been nice to see more. We made a lot of efforts to get into more of these houses in these other zip codes, but we felt that it was something to note right now that in academia, and specifically relating back to the strike in STEM, there's a reason why most of the research is done with people who are comfortable being researched, So yeah, that was something that we wanted to make sure that we brought up today.
Yes, thank you, Keeley. And then going off of that, let's see, next slide. So in terms of relating back to what we found about the main AMP services, so we found that the most common main AMP services by far out of all of our participating households were 100 AMP services. So out of the homes that we were able to tell for sure how many amps they had coming into their home, 100 amps were the most common, and that was 70% of those homes had 100 amps. The lowest we saw was 60 amps, which was in 12% of the homes, and the highest we saw was 200 amps, which was in 16% of the homes. So all things considered, this seems to be pretty good news that all the homes that we were able to survey have relatively substantial electric capacities, and no homes that we surveyed had like really concerningly low capacities from what we could tell based on their panels. And then also, as happy as we are to have collected this main AMP service data from the households, as Keeley was saying, we learned from PEG that this information is only the tip of the iceberg, which we'll talk about more later, but it's just really scratching the surface with regard to determining whether or not a home can support certain electrical appliances. So basically with an induction cooktop in particular, which is what we were most interested in for this particular project, we learned from PEG that the panel alone can't tell you for sure if like one home can support this cooktop. We also would need to know how many outlets there are in the kitchen, and also what the individual capacities of each of these kitchen outlets are. And then we would also need to know the other appliances in the kitchen that were drawing power from these outlets where the induction cooktop would potentially go. So that requires a little bit more in-depth investigation than, again, just looking at the picture of the panel. And as Nathan and Keeley and Mary and Ricky and I have learned, panels can very often be mislabeled. So even if it says like the kitchen has this many amps, that's not necessarily true. And so those are all things that we had to keep in mind. But still, with that being said, we were really excited to be able to get the main amps data like to such an extent, because that's still really important information in understanding a home's total electrical capacity. And back to Keeley now.
Yeah, so then just to briefly touch on some tangential developments that came out of this project, post-COVID, when we were looking back at our data, a question came up about, are any Massachusetts towns or cities reporting electrical capacity in their assessors databases? So what I did was I looked through the assessors databases for the 13 MPOs, which are metropolitan planning organizations in Mass, and that's 352 cities and towns. And if you look at the graphic down there, you'll see the different regions, the MPOs split up across Massachusetts, and there's 13 of them. So basically what I found after going through all the assessors databases was that no city or town in Massachusetts is currently reporting electrical capacity in their assessors databases, which we think is still useful to know that nobody is reporting it, but we do think that it would be really important information for the cities and towns to be reporting. And then the second really exciting tangential development that came out of this project. So the question that we were asking was, based on a home visit that our Mary Brady did, where she talked to a homeowner in a row house or a brownstone who was unable to get an estimate for heat pumps because of the way that her house is designed. We thought that that might make row houses or brownstones, which are such a big part of Boston's infrastructure, a good candidate for HEET's geomicrodistrict. So the action that Nathan and I took as a result of this question was to apply for and receive funding through the Boston University Campus Climate Lab to research building electrification on BU's campus. And Nathan and I came at it from the perspective of wanting to see if geomicrodistrict technology was feasible for brownstones on campus. But we actually ended up combining with another project, which was super exciting. And now we were given the funding. It started this week, and by the end of summer, we will have an economic and technical feasibility study for electrifying different heating systems in addition to the geomicrodistrict for different building classes in addition to the brownstones for different technologies. So it's going to be really exciting, and this grant wouldn't have happened without this project. And then, yeah, looking forward, so something that we took from what we got from PEG, learning that just the electric panel isn't enough to see if a home can support an induction cooktop, because just if there's 200 amps coming into the household, that doesn't necessarily mean there's more than 15 going to the kitchen itself. So what we decided to do, this was actually the idea of Mary Brady again, was to do case studies, one 60 amp household, one 100 amp household, and one 200 amp household, to go into their homes, do a Zoom call, and have someone be in the basement flipping their the switches on their electric panel, and someone be in their kitchen plugging things into different outlets to see which circuit corresponded to which outlets in their house. And that way we can tell more definitively whether or not a household can support an induction cooktop. And excitingly, we had our first case study on Monday. It was with City Councilman Matt O'Malley, and we found his house was a 100 amp household, and we found that they could, in fact, run an induction cooktop. So we're planning our next case studies, and that's something really exciting.
Okay, we're about to wrap up, and just, some final words, some final takeaways from the project. I'll start with mine, pass the mic over, but we've just scratched the tip of the iceberg here in this study. But as I say, the tip of the iceberg gets a bad rap, because some of the very basic information that we've been gaining here, it's necessary but far from sufficient, but it's still important information. It's a starting point. And I feel very excited about, especially what between Mary and Keeley, that new finding about the potential to report electrical capacity in households across the Commonwealth is one thing that I'm looking forward to in terms of scaling this project further. Keeley, do you want to give any concluding remark?
Yeah, so for what I'm learning from this project is just how important it is to work as a team on these kinds of things. I think it was so beneficial that we had different perspectives, people coming from different backgrounds in this field. And I think that we gained a lot from this project, and I think that there's a lot still to be done, but it was, like Nathan said, it was a really necessary first step. And also things like the grant and other stuff might come from that. There's a lot of things that have come about from this project that are really exciting to me. Olivia?
Yeah, so I'll just briefly say one of the great things that I think I've been left with coming out of this project is just, I kind of briefly touched on it earlier, but it's kind of easy in this field or in a lot of fields, to just start to feel discouraged, and especially just with regard to climate change and the issues that we're also passionate about and want to make a difference in. Also as a student, it's been hard to not ever feel disillusioned or discouraged about our own individual power and like how we can do our parts in this movement to transition and improve our society. But basically, just this project taught me that there are even more people out there who are interested in participating and learning more than I even realized. So that was something that was really encouraging for me, and I was really grateful to get to meet some of those people and learn with them. So
awesome. So if you could forward it to the last slide, just to look at some of those really amazing people.